What's up, y'all? This is Uncle Jack 328. Follow me on Twitter at Uncle Jack 328. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's talk some boxing here real quick, y'all. We got Errol Spence Jr. defending his unified welterweight championship over Danny Garcia via 12-round unanimous decision. I am impressed by the champion as well as the challenger in this particular fight. Danny Garcia did everything he could do to hang tough, do what he needed to do to get through the 12 rounds. He never packed it in. He never resigned himself to losing this fight. He did as well as he could throughout the course of the 12 rounds, despite taking more damage than what we've seen him take throughout his entire career. Errol Spence Jr., real quick here, there isn't much to say that hasn't already been said by this point in time, but in terms of the footwork, the punch output, the ring generalship, the clean punching, there isn't too much of a drop-off that's really noticeable between the year-long layoff, the car accident, and this fight here. There were stretches throughout this fight where Danny Garcia took more punishment than what we've seen throughout his entire career. And based off of the way that Danny Garcia looked at the end of this fight, I don't think that that's an overstatement or an overestimation of how well or how effective Errol Spence was throughout the course of the 12 rounds of this fight. Couple things that stuck out to me. The footwork of Errol Spence tonight was the main thing that separated him from Danny Garcia. His footwork allowed him to always either be in position to do what he needed to do, landing punches, doing damage, or it allowed him to be out of position to not receive some of those counter punches that Danny Garcia has been known for. Throughout portions of this fight, he was able to do what he needed to do going forward, moving backwards, moving side to side with the lateral movement. This was a complete performance. Whether or not it was, as exciting as we've come accustomed to seeing Errol Spence, that's debatable depending on who you ask. But I was very impressed by the way that he was able to navigate and do what he needed to do to win a 12-round unanimous decision. Couple things I just want to say about this fight. I do feel as though that Danny Garcia deserves his respect for making it through these 12 rounds. A hard 12-round fight. He definitely was there to do what he needed to do. Errol Spence coming off of the accident, coming off of the layoff, and getting through the 12 rounds and beating Danny Garcia more decisively than Keith Thurman, more decisively than Sean Porter, further establishes that Errol Spence is, in fact, the best fighter in the world at 147 pounds. If you want to put him in your top 3 pound for pound, no argument from me. At this current moment, Errol Spence is one of the 5 best fighters in the world, regardless of weight class, pound for pound. I don't want to get too much into future fights. I do just want to give a quick opinion here. As a hardcore boxing fan, of course, I would love to see him and Terrence Crawford fight at 147 pounds to actually decide who the best pound-for-pound fighter is in the world. But watching this fight, I can't help but think, how much better would Errol Spence be if he didn't have to make sacrifices to get down to 147 pounds? How much more effective, how much more devastating potentially could Errol Spence be? How much better of a fighter could he be from a technical standpoint? Punch output, footwork, ring generalship, punching power, speed. how much better could Errol Spence be if he did not have to make that extra effort to get down to 147 pounds? I think about that. I look at the current landscape of boxing. In my opinion, as much as we would all like to see him and Terrence Crawford mix it up at 147 pounds, I feel the fight for Errol Spence Jr. to establish himself as the best fighter in the world pound for pound, the fight for Errol Spence Jr. to potentially get him into the Hall of Fame and put him in the category of some of the better fighters who have ever laced up the gloves in these particular weight classes is Canelo Alvarez at 160 pounds. In my personal opinion, Errol Spence Jr. is the one fighter with the big enough name and a big enough profile to be able to get Canelo Alvarez potentially to come back down from 168 pounds down to 160 pounds to be able to fight for the legitimate middleweight championship of the world. Believe it or not, I think Errol Spence could be a better fighter as a result of not having to train as hard to get down to 147 pounds. A fight with Canelo Alvarez at 160 pounds could potentially be the biggest fight in boxing. That's a huge fight for Cowboy Stadium. That's a huge fight for the state of Texas. You factor in that at 168 pounds, the level of competition might be a little bit more difficult for Canelo Alvarez, coming back down to 160 pounds to fight a smaller fighter, quote unquote, according to the general public, also an established ticket seller for that area, for the Dallas, Texas area in that stadium. I feel like that's a huge fight. And it's a winnable fight for both fighters. And Errol Spence is definitely not underwater in terms of being able to win that fight against Canelo Alvarez. We'll leave it there. Like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Uncle Jack 328. I'll see y'all at the fights. We out of here.